Yeah. I'm like people introduce themselves. I'm not doing the funny potted biography because that's not what I'm like. Neither. Peppery, that's right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do the year one teacher hand. Nobody can ignore the year one teacher hand. And I'm going to start up the session. My name's Alan Gibbons. I'm the organiser of the campaign for the book, a member of the Speak Up for Libraries Coalition. I write books as a sideline. And I'm going to basically get the 5 members of this panel to introduce themselves. As I said, I'm not good at honeyed words. I tend to be fairly blunt, so if you want to big yourself up, you can do it, or I'll cut you short. So I'm going to give 5 minutes for each person. I'm going to keep them exactly to 5 minutes because I want to hear as many questions as possible. I think everybody on the panel does. This is about you, not about the people at the top panel. And so in the following order that has been given to me, not for any particular reason, Heather Wakefield of Unison, off you go.
Oh, okay, jolly good. Do people need me to use the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the most joy. Stop the clock. Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Heather Wakefield from Unison. I head up our local government, police and justice bit. So I've got nothing much to do in these times, as you can imagine. I'm just going to say a couple of things about the context for today and what's happening to libraries, much of which you know, but I guess if you don't, it's important you know that the Local Government Association for England has said that there will be a £14.5 billion funding gap by 2020, and that many councils will only be providing statutory services, adult social care, child protection, refuse collection and street sweeping. So this meeting and what we do in Unison takes place in a context that's extremely difficult, and I think one of the things that Unison is now intent on doing, and we're talking about it in our team, is actually bigging up the UK-wide picture around the cuts, so that these cuts are not just local happenings that are being dealt with locally and kind of hidden. So we're going to be launching something that a big kind of public-facing campaign, which will be called something like Speak Out for Local Services and Jobs. Title yet to be absolutely determined. I think it's an interesting time because the latest poll on satisfaction with local government services from Ipsos Mori, and they do a lot of polling, shows that satisfaction with local services has increased massively since 2010, which I find really curious. It's gone up from 58 to 73%. We need to think about that. At the same time, the same people, 58% of them, say they think that if the cuts continue, there will be widespread social unrest. So they themselves appear to be happy with their services, but they think everyone else isn't. But it's a surprising finding, I think. The other thing I wanted to just mention is the work that we're doing generally about privatisation, and I think the privatisation of the library services is a very worrying development and something we never wanted to see. And as Unison, our belief is, and I believe this passionately, that privatisation in any form is a waste of public money. There's masses and masses of public money that goes into scoping procurement processes, the procurement process itself, shareholder profits, bonuses, fat salaries to chief executives and managers, big cars, and there's a huge amount of fraud. We know also that the employment practices of some of these companies leaves a lot to be desired, and I don't know if it was mentioned this morning, but Korean is being taken to the High Court for blacklisting and unlawful surveillance of staff. For instance, Serco similarly for being paid for tagging prisoners who either had died, never existed, or whatever. So we have got a whole series of guides, and Matthew and I were talking just now. We've got a whole series of guides on how to engage with the privatisation process and oppose it, but understand it. So we're going to make sure that they're sent out through our email network to everyone. Having said that about privatisation, 65% of the public think that the mail, the rail and the energy companies should be nationalised. So that's also a very interesting polling figure, I think, which came out quite recently. But I really want to make it clear that as Unison we have lots and lots of members in the private and voluntary sectors, and anyone who finds themselves the victim of privatisation should not think that you're not welcome in Unison, because you are. And in fact, I think it's even more important that people join Unison when they're privatised. So we do have a lot of private members. We have got a series on the cut called The Damage, and here's the one on libraries. If no one's seen that, then we can get that to you. And you know, our big focus is going to be around cuts and privatisation, and we're going to make sure that libraries are a big part of that campaign.
Thank you, and 10 seconds. Right, our next speaker on my far right, and I mean that in no political manner, is Phil Bradley from Surrey.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm keeping my eyes on the clock. There are a number of points that I want to make in my 5 minutes. It's also worthwhile making the point that I do spend a lot of my time going around the country teaching librarians, both in the public and within the private sector. So I'm really very much aware of the situation as it regards professionals. On the political aspect to begin with, the situation that we're in with libraries at the moment is nothing to do with austerity. It's everything to do with political expediency, and I believe that it's very much to do with an ideological viewpoint. Not specifically from the government itself, although they obviously do have their own particular ideology, which I personally, and I'll stress personally, think is very anti-education, it's anti-professional, and I think it's also anti-thought as much as anything else. Ed Vasey is doing what he is told to do. The more he gets clobbered by it, the better he will be thought of by his colleagues within government. So I think what we need to do is look at the much wider political viewpoint. I don't think that any of the political parties are immune to criticism, because I've seen library closures in all political areas, whether you're Conservative, Labour or Liberal. There are lots of reasons why there's political capital being made out of either closing libraries or keeping libraries open. It's got nothing to do with the libraries themselves per se. And I think what we need to be doing here is, it's not going to work on a national level. If it was going to work on a national level, with all of the people that have been talking to the Minister, something would have happened by now. And he's clearly not interested, so we need to start looking elsewhere. We need to look much more closely at the local situation. We need to be able to put pressure onto local councillors, because at the end of the election they're either going to be in a position of authority, or they were going to have got voted out. So there's a lot that needs to be done at that level as well as at a national level. I think it's also really important that we consider libraries in terms of activities, not artefacts. This is a problem that we've had for a very long time. If you start looking at a library as a place that you can get your books and your entertainment from, then it's not surprising that people are going to be very anti that, because why should I be paying for somebody else's entertainment? It also means that there are certain idiotic authors as well as other people who start wittering on about the fact that we can get rid of libraries because it's all about books. Libraries is nothing to do with books, it's nothing to do with the artifacts, it is to do with the activities. And in the situation that we are in at the moment, we really need to promote a very positive message about the value of a library within a community. We have to be talking about the fact that the libraries are not about books, they are not about enjoying yourself, they're not about reading fiction. All of those are very, very important things, but libraries are about the community. Libraries are about helping people find a new job. Libraries are about helping people that have got legal issues or health issues. Libraries are about getting people access to the universal credits that they deserve. Libraries are about getting people access to the information and the resources that they have an absolute need, requirement and a right to have. That's the message that we really need to put across in as positive a form as we possibly can do. Yes, we need to talk about the closure of libraries, but to say that libraries, we should have libraries because they are good things, that is not going to work, because the people that are in a position don't know about that, they don't care about that. If the idea that libraries were a good thing was going to make any difference, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in at the moment. So we have to make a very strong economic basis for why libraries are a good thing to have within a particular community. That's really the area that we need to stress. And we also need, rather than expecting people to come into the library, we don't do that as a society anymore. We expect things to come to us. As librarians and information people, we have to go out into the community to actively involve people and to promote and to market what we do much better than we've done in the past.
Cool. 10 seconds short again. Nice one. Right. And again with absolutely no political input, on my far left, Yin and Ezra from the DCMS. And now my near left.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I just wanted to start by saying, well, I did 37 years in local government, of which 20-something years was as a chief officer running a portfolio of services, including the public libraries. And my personal passion is public libraries, in terms of trying to ensure that everybody in the community knows what we do, how they're valued, and that they continue to keep pace with changes that are happening in the rest of our communities, really. I've been in this part-time 2.5 days a week role now for a year, just under a year. And very early on, it seemed to me that I could have been pushed in all sorts of different directions, and chose very quickly that there were 3 areas that I was going to concentrate on, and it was local government, and local government. Because it's local government that basically runs public libraries. It is local councillors that run those services, and it's the support that we can give them, the support that we can give them quietly, often when they feel that they're up against it in a way that they know how. I've spoken to now nearly 46 councils. There are 7 of them that I think, by actually getting to them quietly, reasonably early on, one is able to say, well, look, don't do that, or don't think about that. Perhaps you should go and talk to X or Y. 4 of those councils have done that, and I think from reading the papers they've sort of rode back a bit from some of the original proposals. The 3 areas I've concentrated on, besides local government, is the whole issue of leadership. And here I've done quite a lot of work with leaders and chief executives and others, and it won't be a secret out of school to say that in general, that those authorities that basically are well managed and have good political leadership tend to have thriving public libraries. It is also because they are valued by the corporate organisation, aren't seen as something separate, but seen as something integral, that they thrive. The other is to see, are there things corporately in an organisation that public libraries do better than other parts of the organisation? So often local councillors and even users say, I never knew the library did that. And the amount of times you keep saying to them, well, look, the library service can do that. There was one authority that basically had 2 children's centres next door to their public library. Guess where they are now? Because the children's centres have been cut, they're in their public library. Not as an add-on, but as a genuine part of what we do. And my final bit of work, which I found the most frustrating work, is basically the whole issue of getting people to try and share resources. Trying to get local authorities to basically share services, share resources, try to have computer systems that basically talk to each other, even though we do other things well, has been a really frustrating part of what I do, really. Now, I realise that in a sense, part of local government is being autonomous and having your own thing. But if you've got unitary councils of under 200,000 population, often within a spitting distance of each other, why can't they share things? I mean, I think there are issues of politics, there are issues of other things, but I do think there is like fundamental issues about how. But I finally, and I just to support the point that I think that the campaigners and campaigners have been particularly successful when they've focused very, very closely on what their local libraries are doing, working with their councillors, working with people on the ground, working with the staff, working with people across the piece. So I'm fully behind that. I'm not sure how long my role is going to last, but certainly I've found that in my conversations with local authorities, there is fatigue. People are feeling the pressure. Certainly in my career, which was 37 years, I never had to deal with some of the kind of huge amounts of money that have been taken out of services. One local authority I spoke to basically is having 50% of its operational budget taken out. Now, so I think it is a big issue in terms of how the future is, and I feel for the people that basically have sort of followed on in the sense since I've left, really, as to the stresses and strains that they've got. So, thank you.
Thank you. Right, good. Hey, we're keeping to this. Nobody's overrun. How cool is this? Yeah, you might get a few fewer days after today, I think, with Mr. Bates. But anyway, right. So next, I'm going to ask Janine Cox of the Society of Chief Librarians to make her 5-minute introduction.
Okay, so I'm now really worried that I'm going to be the person who overruns. SDL, we're a local government association. We're made up of the heads of library service from each local authority in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So what do we actually do? We're a volunteer network. Like a lot of you here, we all do this on top of our day job. And whilst we're not a campaigning organisation, we do stand up for the core values which underpin public libraries. So literacy, knowledge, learning, engagement, and I would say enjoyment. We enable the sharing of ideas, we celebrate best practice, and we provide advice and support. We are the people who are managing public library services on the ground, and we support our members by brokering partnerships and developing products which enable them to develop aspects of their services and hopefully make a difference to the communities that they're serving. So what does all of this mean in practice? A really good example is the development of universal offers. The offers are focused on 4 key areas of our service: reading, information, digital and health. And the development of the offers has been a positive and proactive response by ourselves to the challenges that local authorities are facing. We developed the offers in partnership with the Reading Agency, Arts Council, and with support from DCMS and the LGA. They're important because they demonstrate the cross-cutting nature of libraries' work in important areas like public health and digital inclusion. And for me, they reaffirm the relevance of libraries to people's lives. What I want you to do now for just 5 seconds is think carefully about the outcomes that you as individuals would want, and also what you think your communities want. What I would say is most of us want health. We want to be able to live independently for as long as possible. We want wealth, access to jobs and income, and we want to stay connected with our friends and our families. And when we think about those outcomes, what I want you to also think about is libraries actually do that. That's our job. We provide support for business startups, lone workers, job seekers. Job clubs and mentoring opportunities are located within our services. We promote and generate community prosperity. We have a vital role in community memory and narrative, and our space, both physical and virtual, is vital to enabling people of all ages to be connected and engaged. When I launched the office in January, I said that local authorities have never faced such challenging times. And when we're confronted with those challenges, we have to think innovatively, act collaboratively, and manage creatively. We're dealing with changing customer habits, a challenging local authority landscape, and enormous budget pressure. And this has meant fewer issues, less staff, library closures, and new operating models. And we cannot say, as heads of service, leave libraries alone, just defend us. We have to ensure that we evidence their value and describe how that library offer delivers those wider community outcomes. And universal offers enable our membership to do that. They demonstrate our contribution to those wider public policy agendas, particularly health, growth and prosperity. They enable us to develop strong advocacy messages and media campaigns. And they develop clarity around the library offer and ensure that we can articulate that to a range of audiences. And really importantly, they provide a framework from which SCL can take these core areas of the library offer forward. They enable local authorities to shape these areas to meet local need and demand, whilst benefiting from the economies of scale which, through working together, we can achieve. We're in the process of training staff at all levels across the library service in the office, ensuring that they are embedded in all local authorities. To date, we've reached 300. By Christmas, we will have trained 500 staff. That's the biggest rollout of staff training since the People's Network. SDL has also been at the forefront of moving e-lending forward. We sat on the panel, we bid for the funding to deliver the pilot, and we've worked with the Publishers Association to engage publishers. Our advice, our recommendations, our hard work in putting together tenders, recruiting research companies, deciding upon the pilot authorities is moving e-lending forward. Okay? And I'm nowhere near finished, it's so disappointing. But what I would say is engaging heads of service, local members, cabinet leads and stakeholders with these important programmes that are part of universal offers have been essential over the last 18 months in getting out some positive messages about the public library movement.
Thank you. And finally, on our panel, we've got Brian Ashley from the Arts Council. Your 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yes, I'm the Director for Libraries at the Arts Council. And we've been the development agency for public libraries in England since October 2011. And we do it by collaborating with others to advocate, invest and develop all the work we do, but in this case, with library services. In terms of people with libraries in their job description, we have my role and 5 library relationship managers, 1 for each area. But there are lots of other people through the organisation who also engage with the service with libraries. People who lead on things like children and young people, audiences, engagements, digital and creative media, and so on. Earlier this year, we set out very clearly and publicly our view of what a library is, what it is for, and the benefits they bring to people and communities. So we know that libraries speak to people in different ways, and their contribution to the lives of people and communities is wide, ranging across reading and literacy, skills, learning, heritage, creativity, health and democracy, and much else besides. And we continue to make this case in all our development work. We invest in projects and commission others to do the same. So we provide core funding to the Reading Agency, which results in things like the Summer Reading Campaign. We provide project funds to the Reading Agency, Society of Pupil Librarians and others that have supported the start-up of the universal offers that Janine was mentioning, and specific things like books on prescription arose from that. We and the MLA before us have funded and are providing funds, either in full or in part, to test models for shared services, securing funds channeled through commissioning, uses of new technology, testing new ways to generate income. We fund activities that animate libraries, bringing them to life through the Libraries Grants for the Arts programme. It's a £6 million programme, and around 2 million of that has been committed. We help libraries to support businesses through the Enterprising Library Scheme. We support the Local Government Association in carrying out peer review and leadership academy programmes for councillors. We have enabled schemes like that enable libraries to benefit from national deals like Reference Online, Inquire, and Inspiring Libraries for All, Inspiring Learning for All. We're getting towards the end of a project to look at opportunities around automatic library membership, and we hope to report on that soon. And we do a range of research activity. We're currently encouraging some work around specific conditions impacting on rural areas, new business models, and capturing case studies. And we hope to be doing something, we're exploring it now, around the economic value of libraries. So envisioning the library of the future provided the basis of our development work with partners. And we are integrating libraries into our wider work and long-term planning. Our new refreshed strategy should be seen alongside the more detailed advocacy of the range and depth of what libraries do that we put in envisioning. And I expect that, over time, to bring benefits to libraries, including, I would hope, opening up new funding opportunities. We're working with partners on new projects and opportunities, and we'll be advocating for libraries and showing the way they are and should be changing to reflect the way people live their lives. And we talk to other funders, like other lottery distributors, trusts and foundations, and again, we would hope that this will bring benefits to libraries. Across the country, we're constantly in conversations with local authorities and their library services, sometimes supporting, sometimes challenging, but always recognising our respective roles and the challenges that they face. Because our role is outside the statutory framework for the public libraries that sits with DCMS and those local authorities, which is why we don't comment or analyse the relative merits of what individual library services are doing or plan to do. So I would say that it's the opportunities and demands that new technology pose, the ever-rising user expectations of people wanting services anytime, anywhere, are driving change in public libraries, whether, leaving aside all those challenges around financial pressures, even though those pressures are substantial. And the successful services that we're seeing that Elon referred to will be remodelling and redesigning services, as well as repositioning themselves within what local authorities do. And the strategies and solutions that will be developed will be in that local context, and the local council will decide what that looks like. What works in one place will not necessarily work elsewhere because circumstances and conditions vary. And we will continue our work to support everyone in that cause.
Excellent, thank you. Everybody managed to shave 10 seconds off the time. Right, very briefly, we're going to take comfort break at 2:45 because it's quite a long session. I'll be summing up in my own particular way at 4 o'clock. Want to give the maximum, I should say Heather has got to nip off at that break, but everybody else is staying as far as I know. I want to give as much time now when you've got a question. Some of you will want to direct it to a particular panellist. I'll leave it open whether people want to chip in every time, and if you don't have something to contribute, say it. There'll be certain contentious points where everybody will have 2 or 3 minutes from the panel to reply to that. I want to keep the maximum towards the floor rather than the panel in terms of time. I'm going to indulge people. So who has got the first question, please? Okay, stand up, sir. We've got a roving mic, yeah.
My name's Steve Manley, I represent Unison and I work in Derbyshire County Library Services. It was just a quick point I was going to make rather than a question. Heather listed a number of statutory services. She didn't include libraries amongst them. It's worth reminding everybody, frequently enough, that libraries are a statutory service under the 1964 Act. The more so since during the past week, as I understand it, the Court of Appeal has ruled that the comprehensive bit of our statutory nature should include and does include computers in libraries and e-lending, so that we are more comprehensive and more statutory than we were this time last week.
Thank you. I can actually back that up because I had cause once to write directly to the local government association because they actually said that it wasn't statutory on one of their publications and had to be reminded. Does anyone have anything to contribute on that? Are we all okay on stuff? I think we agree. It's a statutory service and there should be open advocacy of that fact and people should be reprimanded when they try to say anything other. So I think we agree on that. Next question,
Alan,
please.
can I just say,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll make sure that that decision, I wasn't aware of that until today, gets circulated, certainly via the Uniform network.
Okay, next question. Yes.
I was going to ask that question, sorry. Peter Richardson, Libraries for Life for Londoners and Chairman of the Users and Friends of Manor House Library in Lewisham. The question of the statute and statutory services came up in 2007 with our own Chief Executive saying we have to be prepared for cuts of non-statutory natures such as libraries. That's on record. I'm sorry, but it is. It is a statutory service, and the decision not to be minded to implement it baffles me completely. So, what in England, if it is a statutory service, should I be worried? Because I am. So, can someone explain? Thank you.
Okay. Right. You know?
Thank you. I mean, I think there are two things that, and all I can do is explain this from anecdotes, which basically alive to me in the last year. There was one county council that basically, argued that their statutory service, which is a big county, rural county, basically said that they would be part of the law if they went down from 24 libraries to 1. Okay? So, in a sense, the Act is there and interesting and very important, but there's a Director of Children's Services that I'm very close to in a big county who said to me, you know, Children's Services have all the statutes that to a large extent, in a sense, it's the point I think you were making. I mean, you can have a whole range of statutory services, but they really depend very much on the leadership of those services, the professionals in them, and clearly what people think that affordability means. And I think that I have been quite taken recently in the number of authorities that said to me, actually, there's the hard statutory services and there's the soft statutory services, you know, and I know where those are. And I think that it is right and important to remind people that the library service is statutory. The only thing is that, you know, it's about how long is a piece of string in terms of people actually interpreting. What was good about the Rural Inquiry and Sue Charteris's work and other bits and pieces is that there's some quite. I mean, I've written something recently with Janine about the process that local authorities should go through. That there are sort of issues about how you consult, what, you know, the kind of options you give to people, and the fact is that if you are a local council struggling, really the best thing to do is to be open and honest with the library users and others about what you're proposing. What I find sometimes really quite mind-blowing is when ideas come totally out of the blue, often, and I'll finish now, often from the prejudices of a leader or you know, sort of there was one library service which had to completely change its mind, where the leader of the council said, oh yeah, I never go to the library, therefore I don't see why we should pay for it. You know, I mean, seriously, this wasn't, you know, he lost his seat, all right? But the thing is, so all I'm saying is that, you know, you have got this notion of people's own prejudices or joys about libraries which come in, and I just think that I don't think the fact that it's a statutory service means that we should be complacent.
I'm just to focus it before I take another point from the floor. I still fail to understand how any library area that, for example, shuts over 50% of its branches can be provided a comprehensive service. So I'd just like to probe a little bit more of that. what do people think constitutes a comprehensive and efficient service? Anybody on the panel wants to chip in on that one? Bill?
I'd like to come in on the point generally. Would be very concerned if we rely on the existence of statutory services, because clearly it's a nonsense at the moment, as Peter has pointed out, and it also only takes an act of Parliament to turn something from being a statutory service into something else. If we are consistently just relying on the idea of a statutory service, that can go really, really quickly. So I think it's very important, again, that we're promoting the positive value of a library service within the community that it's in. Also, the point about going back to what Steve was saying earlier, comprehensive, yes, that's great if it includes computers, but if it costs you money to use the computer, I'm really unhappy with that as the idea of being comprehensive. The resources should be as much as possible free for people to be able to use, so that's something that you need to put in statutory too.
Take the lady here, yeah.
As a retired NUT member, I'm very aware of what Alan Gibbons has done over the years to suggest Julie Boston and to suggest positive campaigns. And one of them, and I think it's still valid, it's the enormous amount of money that goes on the SAT, examination of these poor children, and how it could be spent on book buying for the children. Is there any NUT or UNISA member present who might run with that, because it's not out of date in my opinion?
Okay, any points on that, on book provision? Because book stocks, to me, is part of the comprehensive and efficient service and part of the horrible hollowing out process. Anybody on the panel? Any views on that?
Yeah, I think, certainly from my perspective, and the perspective of a lot of SPL members and ASCL members as well, obviously the provision of children's books is hugely important. I think in lots of ways, the children's service is one of the areas where we've seen the biggest growth over the last certainly over the last 2 to 3 years, where we've seen fiction issues particularly falling in adult stock. Children's fiction issues are really, really holding up well. I mean, this year the Summer Reading Challenge, for example, delivered an increase of 9%. In Staffordshire, over 14,000 children voluntarily joined the Summer Reading Challenge, which was 1,000 children up on the previous year. So there's no doubt about the fact that our children are still reading, and in fact, if anything, reading more. So I think that gives us a very, very powerful argument around investing in that particular area of stock. What I think we do have to do is ensure that we grow those children into library users. And I think sometimes that is what we're not quite as good at. And what tends to happen is that children can fall away as library users. So I think where we do have to put some energy into is how we keep them engaged with the public library service and keep them growing as library users.
Yeah. Anybody else? One point I'd rather is at the same time those positive things have happened, branch closures mean that the younger children who don't have their own transport are more likely to suffer. Secondly, a whole number of designated children's librarians have lost their posts over the same period.
Can I just say something back on that one? I think one of the things that local authorities have got to get much smarter at doing is thinking about what the local authority footprint looks like within the community. So when we are thinking about things like children's centres, the primary school, the library, starting to think about what that footprint looks like. What's the unique bit of the library offer that community is going to make most use of? And then where do we best locate that? Does it remain within the library, and do we bring other services into that library to sit around that? Or do we relocate that library offer and put it somewhere where it might be better used or more extensively used? And I think that in some ways that comes back to the comprehensive and efficient as well. Because there are at some points, when we had the discussion in our group this morning about what does that infrastructure look like, and is that infrastructure still relevant today?
Great, Phil, you had a point?
Yeah, I think the point that I'd like to say there is that we can't look at public libraries in isolation. We also need to take into account that if a government or a society wants to have a literate, intelligent population. We have to start with children, and the place that we start with children is having every single school in the country having its own library with its own dedicated school librarian.
I absolutely concur on that, and of course, I'm on the 7,000 strong petition, which sadly people like Mr. Gold have ignored completely. Julie, you want to come back?
I'm afraid Janine seems to have completely ignored my question. The money is spent, enormous amount of money is spent on SATs examination. It's destroying the children. The middle class children will survive, of course. And the point that Alan made, which could be taken up by Unison and the NUT if they're here, is that you say that the SATs must stop and the money must be spent on the libraries. And that could be publicised in the local libraries, and you would also get the support of the parents who hopefully don't want their children mentally disangled or whatever.
Okay, right, I think the point's made. I'll just leave that with people so we can visit some other areas as well. Right, anyone got the next question? Yeah. Right, one there, one here, yeah.
Hi, my name is David Owen. I'm a Unison local government branch officer, branch chair in the North West. It's a bit of a devil's advocate question, really. We have all the common sense, we have all the knowledge, we know our borrowers, we know the people that we work for, we know our communities. We make good, commonsensical arguments. They're well grounded, they're sensible, and this today has been excellent in getting people to talk to each other about grounded arguments. Folks that are in government are going to continue cutting our services. We're making comprehensible arguments and debating points, but the fact is the cuts will continue. The fact is that 2018, 2020, there won't be any local authorities in this fashion. There will be commissioning authorities. I was at a regional local government service group meeting in the North West, and one of the authorities who was present there, they're going to end up having about 200 people actually working for the authority in the foreseeable future, and everybody else will be contracting. This is the reality of the situation. It's a political situation. So we're making very, very good points because we know a profession, we know our service. I worked in libraries before I went into the branch office. But we see what's coming. In our authority, we're very fortunate because we have a listening council where we've been able to put our message across, and maybe we're doing all right. We've still got maximum sort of 9.9 budget settlement, which is disastrous, but we're trying to work our way through it with understanding with the Labour group there. But we still got an efficiency programme going on. But the fact of the matter is, we've got all the arguments, we've got the right on our side. We're still going to be cut, there'll be more cuts. Is there an extra dimension to our arguments? There's got to be something else because time is against us and the ideology is against us.
Okay, so an endless austerity state. What do people say about that? Are we going to end up with just a skeleton of commissioners and various Carillions and co mopping up? Heather?
Well, I think it's worse than that in a way. I mean, looking at it in the context of Cameron's eternal austerity speech, which he made the week before last, I think, in which they made it very clear that this actually has nothing to do with the deficit or the national debt. This is an ideological war on the public and on state provision. And the funding crisis in local government is so great that there won't be money to commission services. It's going beyond the problem of privatisation. They're said because you have to pay, as we know, usually over the top, the Carillions and Cracketers and Sercos of this world. There won't be the money, there will not be the services. So I'm afraid that the answer to this ultimately is political. That they have to be got rid of at any cost. Whatever we may think of the shortcomings of the alternative, we've got to get rid of them because if we don't and we have another term, then there really will be nothing left. And I guess it also raises the whole question about community libraries and volunteers. I personally think that in a an inclusive kind of happy democracy, volunteering should be welcomed, but not at the expense of, you know, comprehensive, good state services. I think that it's very good for people who are retired or who have time to contribute, and I don't like the idea of a monolithic state which doesn't allow kind of voluntarism and so on to be part of it. But clearly we cannot run a library service on volunteers, and that's, I'm afraid to say, I think the spectre we're facing. In terms of the comprehensive service thing, the problem is that the courts are very loath to intervene in political decisions. And the courts will make decisions on the basis of a decision that the government has taken to cut budgets. The court will not say, we've been there, we've been to the High Court many times to try and get judicial reviews on things. And courts are very loath to intervene in what they see as the political process. So we shouldn't place too much hope on the courts. I think we have to mobilise people and speak up much more loudly about the value of libraries and every other public service.
Thank you. Yemen, any views?
I mean, everything is political, isn't it? I mean, all I can say is that one of the things that worries me at the moment is that the position of the Department of Local Government, CLG, is that their role is complete non-intervention in local government. And that means that there is a sort of policy of, well, those local authorities that are okay, fine. If those other local authorities go to the wall, well, fine. Now, I think that is not a positive position, is it? I mean, I think, and those of us who've been in local government for most of our lives, and we think that the current model for local government finance just isn't working. You know, I mean, in the sense that you've got, I mean, the rate support grant. I mean, I could draw a line from, I suppose, the Wash to Bristol, and say that the effects of the austerity measures have been totally disproportionate in the northern authorities than in the southern authorities. Mm-hmm. Now, nobody in CLG can explain to me why that is, because the formulas for all this and how that works goes back, you know, several years. Now, I don't think you have to be an academic to know that basically, in terms of the public sector and its kind of its position in terms of the national divide of the cake, the government finance is included in that. And yet, somebody the other day said to me, well, what we need is a completely different system. Maybe it should be like the Americans, where basically, you know, local government should raise its own tax and be accountable to its own local people, and therefore. But you see, at the moment, it's so integrated that they don't have. They've had to basically stick to the levels that they've always had. So, I think that there is a problem in the sense that all three political parties they want to see things change in local government. They want things to be more progressive. Some do, some don't. But you never get any real sort of open discussion with local government and the people who run the services to try and find these solutions. And I don't know. I mean, I find that sometimes the LGA can be much more proactive in some of this stuff, but everything is political.
Thank you, Brian.
There's a constant, unremitting need to make the case for libraries. All of us in this room care about libraries and care about their health and well-being. The colleague who asked the question, I think, made the point that we've got all the common sense arguments. There's a rather glib quote from George Bernard Shaw, I think, who said that common sense is a very uncommon thing. And I guess the point I take from that is that making the point that convinces those who believe in libraries is not sufficient. We know that. The point is to find the case and to find the argument and to find the people to put the argument who will convince those who are the decision makers and who get to the heart of the matter. And that will sometimes be through the megaphone, it will sometimes be through a formal report, and it will be sometimes through a lift conversation, and it will sometimes be a petition, and it will sometimes be picking up the phone. So we just have to keep plugging away. It's what we believe in. It's a powerful message out there. And what we shouldn't be doing is giving up.
Janine?
No, I would definitely agree with that. I think it's very much about thinking about what are the key messages that we want to take out of our public libraries. Not just the messages that we want for today, but also the messages about what is that future offer going to look like. And I think it's then about identifying who we want to talk to and then making sure that we can have those conversations.
Bill?
Thanks, David, for the question. We don't live in a sane society any longer. I'm very firmly convinced of that. What we need to do is to look at the way in which those people are thinking, and the way in which those people are thinking is solely in terms of money. And I think Janine was absolutely right that what we need to do with libraries is to evidence their value. I've seen lots of statistics in the past talking about every dollar that's invested in a library repays a certain sum of money. I would very much like to see, and I think the Arts Council might be able to do work in this area, to prove just how much every single pound invested in a library brings back. That's one thing that I think we need to do. The second thing that I think that we need to do is to talk to the people that talk to the people that make the decisions. And by that I mean that I want to see much more outreach from libraries. I would like to see libraries being able to go, or rather more librarians, being able to go to local businesses and say, do you realise what we can do for you? Do you realise how much money we can save you? Do you realise just how much we can do with providing you with good information sources? We're going to save you a lot of money. And by the way, we're about to get cut and we won't be able to do that for you in the future. If the local businesses and the local organisations in the community can see the value in monetary terms of what a library can do for them, they are going to be the ones that can go to the local politicians and say, you can't cut the library because it's going to mean that it costs us money. That's the only language that people like that are going to understand.
You want to come back, Brian?
Yeah, just two very quick points. One is, what Phil's just said reminds me of a situation I remember in Coventry in 1986, which is a long time ago. But I remember when we were opening what was then the new Central Library in Coventry, Debenhams were considering relocating one of their stores into Coventry, and they set as a condition to the local council they would only relocate if they were positioned next to the library because of the footfall they would bring to their business. So those are the kind of messages we can put over. I've forgotten what the other point was. Research. Yes, the point around economic impact of libraries. I don't want to be quoted as making a formal commitment at this stage, but we are looking very seriously at this point of trying to do a piece of research into the economic impact of libraries. You'll be aware, no doubt, that the Arts Council did a piece of work on the economic value of the arts and museums earlier in the year, which made a very powerful case. Now, the model underpinning that research was based largely on the economic value brought by people travelling into an area, bringing their spend with them, and how that added to the value of the local economy. Now, clearly that's not a model that, if we applied that to libraries, we probably wouldn't end up with very positive results. So we have to find a model of economic value that demonstrates, that, if you like, the secondary benefits of libraries. In other words, if the library isn't there, then what will the social care costs of applying to local services be? What will be the impact on schools and learning if libraries are no longer there? So we have to come up with a more, dare I say, intelligent way of coming up with an economic model. Now, there are examples elsewhere in the world that have been done that, and we're looking at those. So I just wanted to let people know that we are looking at that very seriously, and our intention is that if we are convinced it can be done sensibly and that the powers that be will listen to that, we will do that piece of work. But we need to be sure that we will before we embark on it.
I think as we are running up to election, I seem to remember the library campaign did a manifesto or something like that to send in the run up to election. I think it would be good to get as many bodies as possible to make an advocacy argument for libraries to the major political parties in the run up to the election. So that's one little thing that I think comes out straight from. There was another question here.
Anne Smith, Reading Library. Years of cuts have hollowed out library budgets, so we can now no longer afford access to a lot of information that people would expect to find in a library. 161 local authorities are all having to negotiate individually with publishers. one of the few good things the MLA did during their lifetime was to actually do the Oxford Reference Offer, which gave lots of libraries access to things like the OED, the Dictionary of National Biography, and so on. And I see the SCL is now belatedly looking at e-books. But do the panel have any suggestions for a national body that could negotiate on behalf of libraries and actually make some of these databases and online information systems affordable for us all?
Okay, right. John's in. I'll take you as soon as I've just on the panel. Right. So if I start with Phil and move this way this time.
I think I'd look at Brian, to be honest.
Yeah, isn't the obvious way? Should we say Brian? Okay, your answer.
Certainly, in terms of the, I could take the easy way out and just answer the specific point around reference online, and that is being sustained. We believe we've come up with a model that will enable that to be sustained in the longer term, and it's working with the Society of Chief Librarians to achieve that. That then leads on to the more challenging part of the question, which is creating new agreements, new opportunities for all of those things. And I think it's only fair to be honest that the capacity that we have and the expertise we have within our, certainly the Arts Council, within our organisation on our own, wouldn't be sufficient to be able to achieve that. It's nothing like the equivalent of what MLA had at its disposal. So I think the most constructive way I can answer the question at this stage would be that if in talking with our partners with the sector, whether it's SCL, LGA, British Library, SILIP and others, we can identify ways, what those sources are that would benefit from such an agreement, and then look collectively at the means of achieving that, then I'm happy to have that conversation. What I can't, in all honesty, do is sit here and say that the Arts Council is equipped to deliver that as we're currently set up.
Anyone else from the panel want to chip in on that? Okay, right. I think you're reasonably happy with that, yeah.
Jill Bromley, Kent's Libraries Registration and Archive. I say all three parts of our service because I think they've made a huge difference. We've only been Libraries Registration and Archives for the past couple of years. The registration bit is gold dust. Every child, 15,000 of them per year, is registered in a Kent library. That means every parent of every child has to come into a Kent library. And I think we have to, this links to, that's my question here. I think it's vital, obviously, to be lobbying politicians both at local and national level. And I think promoting the positive messages. I think sometimes negative messages can take people down. I think there's so much positive about libraries, and libraries I've therefore worked for a long, long time. But we also need to take the public with us. We've got to face the reality. There are a lot of sections of the public that do not use libraries. And I think this is the balance between change and modernisation and what the traditional view of what a library maybe is, was, and so on. And I think we can have it all. We can go forward, but we've got to. I mean, I think in the discussion group it came up time and time again. People don't know what we do. When I was at library school nearly 40 years ago, we were beating ourselves up because people don't know what we do. It's a real failing, and I think the public come out of the woodwork when they think the library's going to close. However, and I've got to be honest here, the reality is, of those names, thousands of them who signed petitions, only a few hundred are actual users. And we've got to have people using libraries. I think the energy of the people in this room is about getting more people to use libraries. The more people who actually use the service, they are the best advocates for us, the real people who are our users. And I just wonder from the panel, we've never quite got this marketing, this right, and I just wonder from each of you, what is the single message that you would want to put out there that would engage people using libraries? That's what I'd like to know. Take it back.
Right, what is your positive message of advocacy? We had a very good leaflet actually from Unison handed round in the workshops this morning, and I've never seen anything like it from government or councils. Isn't that odd? What do you think? Who's going to chip in first?
Yeah, it's interesting. I totally agree with what Jill just said. In the departments I was director of, in 3 different local authorities, we always had a strong marketing section. Often carved out of difficult resources from other places, that they did not just what Thatcher thought about marketing, but basically the big thing that they did was to actually keep on telling library managers and people who ran libraries who was using their service and who was not. Because being able to know who uses it, who doesn't use it, find ways of actually getting to those people, finding different ways of promoting it, and actually, it's not one single kind of strapline. This is a relentless process. I mean, I always get up and say to staff all over the place, just because you've done it once, it doesn't mean to say you stop. You think of how many times you see those John Lewis adverts. I mean, it's relentless and continual. And I think what Jill has explained is that if libraries can actually continue to offer that dynamic thing in their communities, books and all the other things that are actually part of that, but also can show their ability to be able to work with other people, with natural synergies coming about, new audiences appear. And I think those are also important for communities. I mean, it's like when we were trying to get archives and local history issues together. The public doesn't care whose collections they are. They just want to know where their grandma was born, And the fact that that's held by an archive, which happens to be in a different department, isn't a real problem to the user. I mean, I just wish that the lady talked about stats and stuff. The problem we've got is that there are so many things that libraries do for other people, and other government things, and also it's just you don't get any money out of the people that basically are technically saving that cash. And I just think that the opportunity to merge, to co-locate, relocate, but actually in a positive way, not because you're shutting something, is something that we should be doing all the time. Heather?
I absolutely agree about the positive messages. One of the things that really shocks me is the number of times I've sat in meetings with councillors of different kinds who have been making jokes about the library service, who really are not convinced, a lot of them, that the library service exists for anything other than a small group of bookworms and a few eccentrics who come in, to read the papers. And I think it's very, very important to counter that view. I think it has been said earlier. I find it hard to think of a single message, but I do think it's really important to have the dialogue with the non-users and find out why they're non-users and what they would like their local libraries to provide. After all, many of them are council taxpayers. It's a service which ought to be there for them as much as for the people who use it. So I suppose, my message would be, come and tell us what you want, kind of thing.
Okay, Bill. It's very easy to look at a library and say a library is about books. But if we look at a hospital, we don't say a hospital is about beds. We look at the effect and the activity that we've got there. And we need to do that with libraries. I'm fairly well known for producing posters, looking at sort of propaganda and things like that. One of the posters that's been particularly popular with people is a poster that I put out which said that libraries are dangerous places. And I think that they should be, because a library is where people can come to think, to explore, to experiment, to try out new things, to learn new things. No wonder politicians don't particularly like them. So I think what we really need to do is to really push the idea that when we're marketing a library and a library service, it's the activities that allow people to have that third place that they can go to, which allows them to explore, to experience, to try out new things. And I firmly believe that a library needs to be a dangerous place, because that's what it's about. It's about thinking, experiencing and trying new things out and learning, and that should be a dangerous thing. Thank you very much.
I think that, and I think what you've heard just now sort of typifies this really. I think that there has to be a series of messages. I think it's really, really difficult to hone in on one statement that sort of sums up what you would put into a marketing campaign. I think that message has to be for different people and it has to be for different communities. But I think, going back to what Phil just said, I think that what we do need to focus on is much more around how libraries deliver those outcomes to communities. So the difference that having that library offer there is going to make to those communities' lives. And I think rather than focusing in on almost like the product and what's going in, it's actually what comes out. And what is your experience as a result of using a public library? I think the other thing about marketing and media campaigns, and I did actually say this morning, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I think people need a really good experience of using our service. The most powerful media campaign is people saying you're good. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need people out there saying, I had a fantastic time, I had a really good experience. It's probably like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, but it is vitally important. People have to come across that threshold and have the best possible experience of our service. And I think the other thing is, as well, is that we need far more advocates for our service. And I think in that way, volunteers are really important to us. They are the people often who can be out there and actually describing what engaging with the library service, the difference that has made to them, particularly if they are working within that professionally managed framework and what they're doing is adding value to that overall library offer.
Great, I'll take John Dolman because I didn't take him before, and then we'll come to you.
Thanks, Alan. John Dolan, Silly. Just two problems. One is I don't want to go in hospital, but I don't mind paying for things. I like paying for hospitals out of my taxes, so I think that's a good idea. I don't think you have to be a user to want something. For many grandparents whose children benefit a lot from this. The other thing that is a bit anomalous is the thing about intervention, which seems to be, not very good for local government, but seems to be amazingly positively requirement for hospitals and the health service and the education service. So I don't understand that. On libraries, several times today people refer to the idea that libraries are more than a room with books, that without a librarian or trained staff, they're not a library. And Silicus has worked recently with the but why not, for the professional knowledge and skills base with the redefinition, if you like, of the modern library and library worker role and the new public mobile libraries group that we formed. So there's a momentum there about the people who work in libraries. Now I've not heard very much about the people who work in libraries, and I'd like to hear colleagues' views on a word that's been mentioned, leadership. On local advocacy and the potential for staff to be the advocates for the library service in their communities as well as providing the services themselves, the training they need, and also SCL is doing some work in that area. And also particularly how perhaps some of the skills that aren't available to public libraries are available in other parts of the Silk community, and the potential for cross-sector networking to share skills and knowledge and experience in the different parts of the library information world.
Okay, Brian.
Right, so I'll try and answer the last question and that one as well. I think around the narrative points about getting the positive messages out, and I won't repeat what colleagues in the panel have said because I agree with that. And I'll say that I think we have to be very clear amongst ourselves about the messages we want to get over, and then we don't all have to say exactly the same words, but we need to convey the same messages. And I think we also need to be much more wise about how those messages can be seen by others, and particularly how they can be misused by others, because who frankly don't have the same interest in the service that we do. So what we're doing with our partners is to try and find a way where we can get a consistent set of messages that demonstrate the value around the service, that we can share across all those who are interested in advocating for libraries, and to provide some hooks throughout the year. And the SCL have done some great work around providing a kind of calendar of opportunity for advocating for libraries throughout the year. And if we can all of us start using those opportunities to put out the positive messages, then but each in our own way, and using others to put them on our behalf, then I think things will become much more powerful, because clearly it isn't realistic that we're going to be, and I know I wasn't suggesting this for a second, but we're not going to be in a position of a John Lewis, because we're not going to have those kind of funds to put behind that kind of campaign. But we can have just as powerful a campaign by harnessing the kind of resource that Janine was talking about as well. Leadership, I'll just say one thing about really, which is a current bugbear of mine, and I think we always have opportunities where we can invest in the kind of leadership we need. But I think challenges, and this is someone who's perhaps a bit too long in the tooth, but I've seen several leadership programs over my time. And it strikes me that what we quite often do is if we invest in the people who are leaders, and maybe then they move on to other things, and we haven't invested in the leadership of the sector in the same way. So I hope that we can come up with something collectively with all the partners about a more effective quality of leadership across the sector, but it's about then embedding it within the sector, and that it doesn't kind of disappear when people move on to the next career opportunity.
Anybody from the audience just on that point, because I mean sometimes there is a dissonance between correct and worthy things that we tend to say in policy, and then seeing one librarian struggling on their own in a branch somewhere. Anybody got anything to say on that? Because sometimes I do find that gap. Yep.
Hello, my name's Julie. I'm from Cambridgeshire, and I work as a library assistant. I'd just like to ask, it's kind of connected, it has been going through my mind. I'd like to ask Janine, I listened to a lot of what you had to say, and one of the things that sort of stuck out in my mind is the fact that you said that your group wasn't a campaigning group. And I just asked the question, why not?
That's nice and pithy.
I guess that is an interesting one to answer really, because I would say that we are not constituted as a campaigning organisation. But what I would say that we do, in terms of what I said earlier on, is that we do stand up for those core values of the public library service. And certainly within our own authorities, it is our responsibility to work with members and leaders of the local authority, chief executives, to put those positive messages about public libraries into that forum. So whilst we are not, I guess, a campaigning organisation in the way in which you would probably describe Voices for the Library, I think that what we do, and lots of skills that we use within our own authorities, you probably would say is about campaigning, advocating, getting that message across really.
Okay, can I just ask one supplementary? Is there going to be a firm encouragement that every single area supports National Libraries Day this year? Because we did have one or two that didn't.
Yes, there is. Certainly from SPL's perspective, we've got a meeting on Wednesday. It's on our agenda. We will be talking about it as the executive, and then that will be going out into the region.
Good to hear. I'll be putting that on my blog. Right, yeah.
I'm just going back to what you said. I'm glad to hear what you just said, but I think you need to tell people, you need to get that message through what you're actually doing, because I don't think it's reaching everybody that it should do. And I realise it is a difficult line to tread when you're dealing with many, I suppose the trendy word is stakeholders, isn't it? As a library chief. But I think it is important communication. Okay, you might not call it campaigning, but in a sense it is, isn't it? Campaigning can mean different things to different people. And very often I feel that perhaps if the chief was able to perhaps publicise a little bit more, the membership of the SDL and what they were thinking, what they were doing, might, it's an opinion that has some weight. Thank you.
Okay, right, can I just say, guide us it? Just a show of hands, do people want to take the comfort break, or would they prefer us to sail through, in which case I'd probably do my little speech somewhere 3:20, 3:30, and then you're away a wee bit earlier, or do people want that comfort break? Who would like to go straight through? Who would like the comfort break? I think those people can just slope out then. I'll manage if that's okay. It's a clear indication of the majority, okay? So let's say the next question. Alright. Thank you, Heather, by the way.
Sorry.
Okay.
I wondered what the panel thought would make them keep a consultation in relation to library services when cuts or closures or changes are proposed, having just gone through or got to the end, close to the end of one in Lincolnshire, where we've done a lot of hand-holding for the people trying to fill it in, to fill the survey in the libraries, and we've seen a lot of the information that's come out of it. What would you call it? Massage might be a bit strong, but played around with a bit.
Yeah, having, just before I introduce the panel, having debated the leader of your council on BBC Lincolnshire, I think massage would be, I mean, I think it was a brick wall. He repeated the same thing, we need to make cuts, we need to make cuts, we need to make cuts,
Yeah.
and I think that particular exercise was a total fig leaf and not properly done, personal opinion. Right, okay, Yellen?
I mean, I think that if you go back 2 steps, I mean, the best way to survey people and ask them about what they want shouldn't. I mean, there is a science in how you do that, you know. And what they did in Lincolnshire in marketing terms would be called using a corrupted sample. You know, because it wasn't, because what you need to do is to basically get something that actually takes the sample across the whole piece. You know, so what you do is you don't necessarily invite, because that's the thing, if you have surveys which invite people to actually respond, generally it can be people who want something to happen or agree. You know. So what does Mori do? They basically go out to people's houses. They take a kind of, you know, a cross section of people, and you know there is a science as to how these things are done. And I think that in my opinion is the honest and open way to do proper consultation. I think that the other thing, and we've done a joint article about this. We think that those things should be done also openly. You know, and the methodology should be open in terms of how it's actually used. And then the council at the end of the day has the right to decide what it decides. But to be able to say, well, okay, look, here we are, we're thinking of these sort of options, what do you think about it? And then surveying it in the way I described is really the honest way of doing it. And I think sometimes it costs a bit of money, but I think it's worth it, because what it can do is to stop the sort of debate that we're currently having in that county about whether this is the true voice of the people or not. You know, so I just think, you know, I mean, people are, there's a huge amount of expertise about how to get a cross section of public opinion. You know, nobody's ever stopped me in the street and asked me who I'm voting for or anything. But I mean, you know, there are some very, very good methods to be able to achieve it, and I would urge everyone that if you really want to get to say, I mean, that's certainly the way that I used to various jobs with marketing people, be able to, I mean, we ended up being able to profile virtually every library in the county as to those people who didn't use it, or those people who didn't, and strategies with them. You know, every year there was a different group that actually we targeted, but that was using objective research. And I think that is the only way, because you can drive a coach and horses through some of this stuff.
Anyone else from the panel wants to come in? Brian?
I think there are many ways in which you can carry out an effective consultation, and there's no one blueprint that is right for everywhere. The critical factor for me is actually the attitude with which you go into the consultation. Are you going into it with a genuine intention to listen? And also, are you going into it with a transparent sense of where the parameters are in that consultation? Because it's very rare that there's no restriction. One of the reasons why the consultation has been undertaken is because there's a challenge and issue to be faced. So I think the context for that has to be set out clearly, that people understand, and that they understand that if they're being asked to favour one approach or another, that there may well be consequences behind that that may not be very comfortable to accept. That's why I keep coming back to the sense that it's the attitude with which you go into the consultation that is more critical to its success than necessarily the exact methodology you follow.
Okay, we have a hand indicated. One here and then one as well as the back.
I agree, as a sociologist originally, I certainly agree with you. But from that, I thought, how do we share good practice needs to include how we share the information that we got it wrong. And in the same way that you can pool good resources, I hear lots of good things about what different services are doing, and we've got many good things we're doing in our own service. But it would be really helpful sometimes to be more honest about the things that maybe haven't worked and why not. And that would be a useful pool of resources from my point of view. Not really a question, but thank you.
We'll take the hand at the back. That was on.
You can, on the whether we're missing the point here a bit, with consultation, I think anyone who has done a local housing consultation knows how skewed those consultations are. They set one community against the other, they ask questions, councils then ignore the answers to those questions, or I've even heard, well, I know, of councillors putting pressure on communities to answer those surveys in one particular way, pushing the results before people have even responded. So I'm not quite sure what we're talking about. The ideal consultation, because that's not the reality. Shouldn't we be more focusing on cluing people up to the pitfalls of responding to consultation?
Okay. Any other contributions, questions for the panel? Yep.
Thank you. It's Trevor from Oxfordshire. My experience in the last few years of consultations from local authorities mean most of them seem to be sham consultations, to be perfectly honest. They start out with one idea, there's no options given to the public to choose from. It's, we're going to do this, what do you think? Don't listen, we'll do it anyway. Isn't it the role of the DCMS to intervene when consultations are so clearly wrong? I mean, in Oxfordshire, there's councillors that told me that the consultation was actually a sham. It sort of makes a whole mockery of the whole democracy thing when the DCMS is supposed to superintend the library service in councils, make sure they're doing these things right, and they're not lifting a finger to help us.
Well, I mean, I think that the one area that certainly the rural experience, and where when authorities get reported to, the DCMS, that they do have quite, my colleagues do have a very, very complex matrix that they assess. And one of the things, you may not believe this, one of the things that they do look at is basically the equality side of it, which is basically based on how the consultation has taken place. And certainly in the kind of, I suppose, in the kind of counselling, quiet counselling that I do with lots of authorities, the one thing we spend a lot of time on is basically how they construct the consultation. And I think it is not good enough. I mean, it's not good enough to be able to just say, well, that there is one option. There is a process you need to go through to basically be able to say, well, what are the options? And I just think that process is still variable, across the council, across councils. And I'm not sure we I know get stuff almost at the last instance when the local authorities actually made the decisions, and then they're saying, well, this is what we plan to do, and then people say, well, they didn't consult. And I think that there is good practice as to how it should be done, but it's not something that we sort of get involved in much.
Why not?
Come back.
I think what's frustrating is, this has sort of rumbled on for years with all these dodgy consultations up and down the land. There's some campaigners have pushed to judicial review, where like in Gloucestershire, for example, the judge says it's an example of bad government. And still, despite, and I know you're saying don't rely on the Act, but superintend the library service is enshrined in law, and it doesn't seem to be happening. And I know you're bought into replace the ACL. I'm just really frustrated as to why all of this is going on, and you know, libraries are being decimated, and the DCMS is just sitting on its hands or passing the buck to locality or...
Elizabeth? I think Elizabeth?
Sorry. No, I just don't think that's an acceptable answer, really. You know, you see it all across the country. People came out, in Croydon, 20,000 people wrote and responded to the consultation. People took to the streets, we stood in the cold, we were discouraged from handing out the consultation. I was criticised for trying to skew the results by handing out the consultation to people. We were photocopying them in our, you know, from our own resources because they didn't have them in the library. The children's consultation didn't come out until the last minute. We then photocopied them and circulated them via a network. We did the consultation for the local authority. They consulted on 6, they then applied it, they ignored the results, and we know they ignored the results. We had to go through a process of trying to get the results. They're in such a shambolic state that they couldn't even be used, including sorting them alphabetically. So it refers to C point C above, and there's no point C above because there's a C of other comments. I mean, glaringly obvious that they completely ignored the consultation, yet they get away with it. And that's why, because nobody's actually holding authorities to account. People locally are just feeling completely disempowered by these consultations.
If I could just come in, Lincolnshire, the deputy Gowlighter, I think I've got his position right in the council, actually said that 5,000 people on the recent demonstration was paltry and representing nothing. Now, 5,000 people is a very large demonstration in a place like, which has got few urban centres like Lincolnshire, and I think any councillor who says something as partial as that really ought to look at their role in the democratic process. But two more people have indicated, that's Julie and Gary. So Julie?
I've also got Diane back here, so...
Okay, Gary then, Julie then. Well, Julie's here, and Gary's there.
Hi, I'd just like to share some comments that I got via Twitter about the whole sort of, you know, engaging with local politicians debate. I'll read that word for word. Dear DCMS, what if your local politicians refuse to attend public meetings about libraries? And if councillors respond to concerns with, I note your points, but I don't intend to respond. And also if councillors talk and laugh over your statement when you're given the chance to speak about libraries to council, what role should DCMS take then?
Right, should we just take Julie? I'll let you come back in a moment, and anybody else on the panel who wants to.
I would suggest a Unison shop steward goes and sits in that seat now. It's just horrendous that the workers here are given no space, and also that the fact we're encouraged to ask questions. Goodness me, people have got something to say. And I found the panel really depressing, apart from the arts man and somebody else. And in Bristol, I've been involved in bloody transport consultations for almost 20 years. It costs a fortune, and the transport is more expensive, more unreliable, and more killing people than ever before.
Right, one more, and then I'll let the panel come back. And don't be depressing, panel.
I can't name this council, but recently there was a library consultation in a particular area, and we know that in the larger libraries, which obviously were destined to be kept open, there was a quota and staff were encouraged to get as many people to fill in the questionnaire as possible. In the smaller libraries, which one might cynically say were more lucrative to be sold, you actually had to go and ask. They had been told there was a shortage of questionnaires. There was no publicity about the questionnaire, so it relied on the customer knowing. And they had to go into the back to fetch out a questionnaire, thereby making it look as if nobody in the smaller libraries was interested, and possibly therefore resulting in closure of those libraries.
Okay, right, I'll let Yin come back in. Anybody else wants to contribute on the panel?
I mean, I know the points that people have said about the consultation issue. I mean, I think, I've just recently written a joint article about what certainly I personally consider to be the proper way to do it, which is basically not to have one that you organise yourselves, actually get somebody else to do it in an honest and open kind of scientific way of actually assessing public opinion. And I think that for me is still the best way to do it. I think that consultations which are run by the authorities themselves or partner organisations end up kind of causing more problems than they work. And would strongly advise people not to do that. But in terms of best practice, there is good practice. I just wish that people would use it.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel would like to chip in? What, Brian?
In a sense, it's repeating what I said before. It is about the openness of approach to the consultation combined with open realisation of the parameters within which the process is happening. So there will often be unpalatable decisions to be made, and I think it's better to involve people in the making of those decisions. But in the end, there also has to be an acceptance that those decisions will have to be made, and they won't always be comfortable. But I come back to the point that it's the attitude and the approach that goes into the consultation that makes it effective.
Yeah.
Philip Bromberg from Brent. I'm sorry to come back to this point about the DCMS and its failings, but I'm a bit unhappy about what you said just now, because in Brent we have a consultation which certainly was not by anybody imagination more than best practice. It was a terrible consultation, and yet it showed absolutely clearly what the views of libraries were about. Now, when we went after the traditional period, we actually managed to get to see people and the people who went local DCMS. The rural inquiry talks amongst other things about local authorities having to look at the needs of local people from their local service. Now, in Brent, there wasn't a great deal of information about that, but there was a consultation which had been responded to by government, for example, people which gave a completely clear view. The DCMS could easily have said, well, this consultation was very poor, but it demonstrates that people want the libraries to stay open. They could have acted on that, and they didn't. I'm not entirely sure why you're considering that.
Right, those feel like relax. I mean, the thing is that. Sorry, I mean it's pretty clear, somebody quoted. I mean, I think that there is a feeling that basically the DCMS doesn't intervene. Yeah. Part of that is the assessment that's done by colleagues about the process. But all I can say to you is, I mean, I've written an article with other people about how I think the best practice should be. It's up on the various sites. In terms of what the process should be. And I feel certainly that it needs to be open, it needs to be objective, and as Brian says, the options need to be clearly expressed, and the way that the survey is then done should be done independently, and then even those results should be shared with the people in that community. Ultimately, it'll be up to local councillors to decide what they do with that information. And I just think that, and I think where in rural particularly, it was that aspect of it that actually was very strongly criticised. That's the way the DCMS currently works. The interventions are certainly my interventions are personal in terms of, my relationship with local authorities that I've described. But I think that there is an issue about trying to make sure that any consultation is really objective. And the fact that there's controversy in this room about how it happens is an expression of why they haven't been very successful.
Okay, I've been asked to remind people on Twitter, this is my reprimand, to please identify themselves when they speak. We've got one there, Laura, and then I'll take Phil in the panel.
You've said some very good words about what you think best practice is for consultation. But when you see that best practice is not being carried out, doesn't the DCMS have any responsibility to require that best practice and to have a re-consultation? I mean, you have to take some kind of responsibility for being in a position of government. I think it's absolutely outrageous. Who are you?
Oh, sorry. Sonia Noble from Brent.
Laura, then Phil, and if you want to come back, by all means. I suspect you're going to say pretty much the same thing.
We've got one person here as well.
Right.
I just did want to say, don't get it Yenon so much. I'm very pleased to see him here. He's half a man, as it were. Working for Help Him in a department which makes it absolutely clear it is not prepared to do anything about anything, no matter the numbers you present to them or the reasonableness of your case, or whether you've got a judge behind you saying we really think this part of the affair that we're judging on is a matter for the DCMS, the quality of the service. They will not do anything no matter what. That's not going to change. So just don't shout at Yenon. But I do want to ask, and I want to go on after asking, but there are accepted guidelines on what is good practice in consultation. We all know and have known for decades the kind of swindles that actually go on. Is there really no enforceable standard for consultation that anyone could enforce, you or somebody else? And I also wanted to go on to say that I'm feeling more and more bewildered and confused and dissatisfied. Some very, very good things have been said today by the panel and here, but I leave feeling more confused than ever. There's all sorts of people doing all sorts of things, a poster here, a leaflet there, a campaign there, a useful piece of research there by this organisation, another one by that one, the whole in the middle represented by the DCMS, and I just think it's an uncoordinated muddle. Some good stuff is being done, but somebody has got to sort it out, pull it together, stop the duplication, work together to produce the kind of things we need, like advocacy materials, whatever you want to call them, possibly a national campaign, getting those positive stories out, getting that hard-headed economical research out, and the kind of practical help that people need at campaigning level. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things which are, to my mind, national scandals. The only service giving advice to those poor devils of people who are trying to volunteer to take over services is a bloke called Jim in Buckinghamshire, who thinks volunteer libraries are a bad idea, but is trying to do his best, basically, in his spare time to help those who come to him. And the only national information service on what is happening in libraries and what news is coming out about them is provided a bloke called Ian, who's sitting there in his using his 9-year-old daughter's laptop.
It's got a key missing.
So I want to come out of here, or continue from this day, coming up with a coherent list of what wants doing, and I want to get it sorted, and if no other organisation will step in to do that, then the library campaign will.
One more at the back, and then I'll take Phil, and then Billy and John.
Alan Wiley, Stop the Privatisation of Public Libraries. What did the panel think of the current situation in Croydon, Hounslow, Ealing and Harrow, where Carillion have recently bought out JLIS and have within the last few days threatened staff with redundancies? Also, do they see models like social enterprises, mutuals and trusts as just Trojan horses for commercialisation, outsourcing and privatisation?
Okay, well, take Phil and then we'll carry on straight to that point, so if you want to address both.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very clear from what people have been saying this afternoon that the idea of consultations do not go down very well, and it makes perfect sense why they don't. One of the things that I certainly would like to be able to see that comes out of this meeting and the subsequent one that's taking place, if we're not going to have consultations, what can we have instead? If we are going to have consultations, Ian has certainly made a very clear indication of the kind of things that should be involved with a consultation, and I absolutely agree. Open, objective, clearly expressed options should be independent. I would like to see a situation where we are in a position to create that set of guidelines or to enforce that set of guidelines, and I would also like to see a commitment on behalf of DCMS to say that they are prepared to say this is exactly the definition that a consultation should have, and that they should be in a position to look at the consultation, look at the criteria, and if that criteria has not been fulfilled, that they should be prepared to say they are going to do something about that. Now, there are lots of organisations, SIP included and plenty of others, that will be more than happy to work with them to work out exactly what that set of criteria should be.
Okay. Right, on Carillion and private intervention in the library service, Janine?
That's wonderful.
Sorry. I think this is I think, to be fair, I think this is a really difficult issue. And obviously, as you just say, I think, well, I would say that, but I do think it is difficult. I think I was certainly very surprised when picking up through some tweets and social media what had happened with John Lang and what is now happening within Croydon itself. I'm not sure that there is a great deal else that I can say at this point. I think with things like mutuals, social enterprises, it is really very early days to see whether they are going to be successful and deliver the sort of outcomes that are being talked through. Many of us have been to the workshops where we've heard the model for York talked through, explained. I think many of us have sat at those meetings and still can't quite work out how that is actually going to, what that is actually going to look like in 4 to 5 years' time. Not a satisfactory answer, I appreciate that. But I think it is something that lots of us are not particularly comfortable with.
Right, I'm going to address this in my final summing up. Brian, Ian and Bill.
I think I made clear in my opening remarks that the Arts Council doesn't engage in specific comments around specific scenarios around specific local authorities, so it would simply be going against that and inappropriate for me to comment on what's going on specifically in Croydon. As regards the broader point on trusts, outsourcing and all the rest of it, I think I would certainly echo Janine's point that it is very early days. I think what we should be careful about is not to knock people who are with a great deal of genuineness and integrity trying to seek new ways of delivering services at a time when they're facing enormous challenges. That doesn't mean to say that every model that's being tested is satisfactory, but I think we should be giving space and opportunity for people to test those things with a clear and open understanding of the risks involved. It's not the Arts Council's position to take any political stance at all on these issues, but we are expected by everyone, I think including people in this room, to encourage finding solutions to what is, we've all heard, is an intractable problem. And I think we should be supporting colleagues to try and find the best way through that. And as I say, some of those will be not satisfactory, won't work, and won't be sustainable, and we just need to recognise that. But others, it may be possible that we will find some options that will work, and we should be encouraging people to explore those.
Right, just to focus the discussion, and people can come in from the floor. I mean, I'll say exactly what I think as chair. I come from a background of education, and we have seen an absolutely dogmatic pressing of the case for free schools and academies as superior. And we have now seen the Secretary of State have a statement in favour of an academy where there is malpractice and fraud alleged. We've got another one where a 27-year-old untrained head teacher actually resigns because she's incompetent to do the job. Well, quelle surprise. And another one collapses entirely with the worst Ofsted reports in living memory. I suspect that's exactly what we'll see with a lot of private providers in the public library service.
As the half man over here. I mean, I just think I think it was David Owen asked a very important question about this whole movement, and when I talk, endlessly to local authorities, the commissioning model, in inverted commas, is one that comes up all the time, and some of them are way down the road in terms of the different organisations that they're currently contracting with, and if I say that I think that is one option that they are pursuing all over the place. I'm not going to say whether I think it's right or wrong.
John, Dolan, then Phil.
So, no,
you're okay. Phil?
I'm going to say it's wrong. Libraries are not there to make money. Libraries are there to improve their community. Libraries are there to help the people in their community. Libraries are there to help people get back on their feet, to make them well, to make them better, to get them back into jobs, to help them if they have legal issues. They are not there to make money. Now, if we have people that are standing in between the library and the community, there is bound to be a disconnect. The library and the library service is owned by the people of that community. Libraries can only work well with their librarians if they are in a position to work with that community directly, to listen to what those people want and to respond to those needs, not to respond to making money.
That was me as impartial chair clapping you to the echo.
Hi, Paul Bell from Unison. Just a point about clubs and mutuals. Unison's position is very clear in terms of privatisation. It's a bad idea. It's always a bad idea. It's always a disaster. And if we apply that to, say, supermarkets and libraries, and you look at the comparison, there's no difference between Tesco's, Asda, Sainsbury's. They're different colours, but they all sell the same products. There's nothing different apart from what makes the most money and what they can use as a loss leader. When you apply that to libraries, they'll be rationing and they'll be dictating what books people will read based on popularity. So you have 50 shades of everything and no knowledge of anything at all. So privatisation is a complete no-no. But in terms of co-ops and mutuals, this is another area that it's one of my areas that I work on as far for use across local government. Co-ops are a fluffy idea, aren't they? There's something lovely to think about. A co-op, so nice, so innocent. It's there where you've got employee ownership. Well, the Mutual Task Force in the Cabinet Office, who's charged with pushing this agenda forward, is about making employee ownership 8 people out of 200. Well, that's not a co-op. And the international definition of a co-op states clearly what that is. A mutual is a different kind of beast. It's kind of social enterprise. You've got two models of that. You've got the commercial model, has to sell something. or it has to be cheaper, it has to compete. And what gets affected then? It's normally the terms and conditions of the people that are working in that organisation. And then you get a two-tier workforce, a multiple-tier workforce. So the idea of a co-op is something fluffy. And there's a lot of Labour politicians that think, oh, this is a really good idea. I've heard of them in my own Labour group in Lewisham. We'll be a co-op council. Well, that's wonderful. They have got no idea what a co-op council means. And at the end of the day, what it actually means is when the incubation period is over, when the financial support of that trust or that organisation is over, what it will mean is we'll have to compete in the private sector, who's really good at drawing up contracts and competing and winning the contracts, and very poor at delivering those services to people. So we need to put the co-ops and mutuals in the context of pre-privatisation, because in reality that's what they are. I can understand people engaging and trying to do their best if there is no alternative, because often it's better for people to go into a co-op than it is to be privatised. But we cannot disguise the fact this Trojan horse, in effect, is pre-privatisation for full privatisation after the incubation period is over.
Right, colleagues, I've got two more people. I think if we take these two people, unless three more people, I sound like the Spanish Inquisition sketch. And then, if we give 2 minutes for each panellist, and I'm going to ask them to take account of what people say now, but their vision of libraries for the future, 2 minutes each at the end. I know it's short, but one pithy point that they think is absolutely crucial. So 3 members of the audience, then we do that, and then I'll sum up the discussion with us, okay? Of the day.
Hi, Trevor from Oxfordshire again. There seems to be all of these experiments with different models of provision for library services up and down the land, chuck them onto volunteers, give them to mutuals or independent trusts or whatever. There doesn't seem to be any real research from the national organisations into which of these models work. There's been endless reports in the last decade into libraries, but all of them seem to have missed the point. Will any of the national organisations look into actual evidence on volunteer libraries, whether they save money and provide sustainable service, whether any of these other models do any of that, or otherwise we're just sort of following ideological paths in the dark, basically. So I just wondered if any of the panel would pick up on that.
We've got about 6 models in one service.
To take the other two.
Last two.
Kathleen Frenchman, Library Campaign, Libraries for Londoners, Friends of Islington Libraries. I want to do something that I couldn't ever have believed I'd done, which is speak up for volunteers. For most of my life I thought volunteers had absolutely no role in libraries except possibly arranging the flowers. But then I thought, well, there are a lot of people about, people like me who are retired, well educated, well read, lifelong library users who know their duty, know where to find books, know what sort of quality things are, and this evening, and could actually contribute quite a lot. My borough actually doesn't use volunteers, but today all the discussion has been that volunteers are really second rate, and I'm sad to say that that isn't the case. That isn't the case anymore. Volunteers, I think, are really better informed than untrained library staff.
I'm Dawn from Croydon Libraries. We've actually have the policy of increasing our volunteers actually, so at the expense of having redundancies. So I was actually going to ask, were any government officials invited today? Because you said earlier that there's been no open discussions with government about the future of libraries, and I was wondering if anybody would come as a representative of local government to speak about their policies on libraries, but there's nobody here today. Did anybody invite anybody, or they turned down the offer?
I'll speak to that, yes. We wondered, should we invite also the LGA, should we also invite the reading agency, which is, in my view, the de facto development agency for libraries in this country. We just thought that 5 people was as much as anyone could bear. But I do agree, the LGA was top on the list that should also come, and we're certainly going to from what we've picked up today, we're certainly going to be approaching them.
And also just a couple of MPs, because I feel in Croydon that we had a councillor come round to look at the libraries about the cutbacks, and she never used the libraries, you know, and we did a display about what was going on in the libraries. Oh, I didn't know you did all these things for the elderly and for the children and reading groups, and it is getting the message out there. So you need to invite some sort of guests like local MPs to come to these meetings to know what's going on, because they have to make decisions, and if they don't use the libraries themselves, they don't really know what, you know, why they're there. And if they've got money to make cuts, then they choose the libraries because they're not using them themselves.
Just from the chair, I will say I famously invited Andy Burnham, who couldn't attend, and Ed Vasey to the 2008 campaign for the book conference. And Mr. Vasey then spelt out exactly how he would save a comprehensive and efficient service, how no libraries would close, how school libraries would be defended, and I find that interesting. Okay, right, so I'm going to ask 2 minutes for each panellist, and then I'll say my bit.
Sorry, just very quickly, I totally agree with you, Laura. I think it's really important that this campaign really connects with the local government associations. Ultimately, it is local councils that make decisions about libraries, and frankly the most successful campaigns have been those that have actually focused very, very, very primarily on what's happening locally. And I think that's the key. I think there are real issues about their strengths and their weaknesses, but I think that is a forum that does need to be part of it. As a closing statement, I mean, I'm a huge personal and professional supporter of libraries. I've run many in my time. I see them as energetic, community-based, dynamic places which welcome everybody, which are changing all the time to make sure they reflect the needs of their locality. No two libraries are the same. You know, libraries are essentially local, they reflect the needs of their local community. The people who run them need to know what their community wants. And the most successful libraries are the ones that will continue to do that, and do that in relish.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you. A couple of quick responses and then a final point. Firstly, we are big fans of the Reading Agency and everything they do. That's why we fund them to do what they do. So just because the Arts Council isn't doing what the Reading Agency does, doesn't mean to say they're not joined up. Trevor's point around research into business models, we are in conversations about doing a piece of research around that. It won't be just confined to library services, it'll be across a range of different organisations that the Arts Council engages with, but I have bought a seat for libraries at that table to have that piece of work. I won't hold my breath as to whether it tells us anything, because as has been said from the floor, many of these models are still in the early stages of development, and so it may be too soon to be sure.
We've been picking up on the work that was done by the MLA, because they did library stuff, which
it's all in that.
Have been bought.
It's all in that journey, yeah.
Okay.
And I suppose it feels almost a bit glib to be saying this, but I just want to read a couple of things from the Arts Council's response to envisioning the library of the future, because it does feel to me, in terms of some of the debates, life moves on so quickly and people forget what's been said. This was only published in May, and I still think it holds true. So 2 statements. One is, there is a clear, compelling and continuing need for a publicly funded library service. Full stop. And secondly, we see public libraries as trusted spaces, free to enter and open to all. In them, people can explore and share reading, information, knowledge and culture. Full stop.
Thank you. Right, I love the pithiness of these answers. Right, Janine.
Okay, I think the future looks very different, will be very different, and I think it's very, very challenging. I don't think there's anybody sitting in this room who doesn't understand the full scope of the challenge that's facing not just libraries but public services generally. What I do think is that there is a huge need within communities which libraries continue to be well placed to actually respond to. As I said in my opening remarks, I think libraries are still absolutely crucial in delivering those key outcomes for communities. I think it's really, really important that libraries hold on to those underpinning values and that we don't lose those values that, you know, have held true to the public library movement, I think, for a long, long time. So all of those things around literacy, promoting literacy, encouraging reading, encouraging learning, promoting learning, they are absolutely key values of the public library service. What we do need to ensure is that we are flexible enough as a service to be able to continue to meet those changes, both in terms of our workforce and in terms of our offer. And I also think we need to be ambitious and positive about the future. I think sometimes it's really, really difficult to be that, but I think we do need to actually have that clear thought about what a public library can be, what that public library offer can be. And I think one of the points that was made earlier is that they must reflect community need, whether that be in terms of a physical building or a virtual presence. That must engage the community that it's being delivered towards too.
Thank you. Beth. Thanks. Trevor, I can't make a commitment because I'm not in a position to make a commitment, but that's a commitment that can be put forward through to the City Council, and there's two trustees here, so I'm very happy to respond and report back to them on that. The lady, I'm afraid I didn't catch when I talked about volunteers. There's nothing wrong with volunteers at all, as long as volunteers are supplementing a service. The issue is when volunteers replace professional librarians, partly because it's a professional librarian. The clue is in the word professional. It doesn't help the profession. It also doesn't help the individuals and the communities that they are in when you have poor volunteers that are doing their best, but they are not in a position to replace professional librarians. We need professional librarians, and I'm really interested to see whether the DCMS seems to think that we can manage without them and have the replacement with volunteers. Now, moving on to the next point, libraries are about their communities. Librarians work with their communities, and certainly I agree with the other points that have been made here. We need to promote libraries. We need to be positive about what libraries are doing and positive about what libraries can be doing in the future. Absolutely vital. We need to continually stress the point that an attack on a library is an attack on a community, and it is unacceptable. And the way in which we can make it unacceptable is to say to local politicians, local councillors, as well as nationally, that if you are not providing and supporting your local library service, why should we be supporting you with our votes? Because that is the only thing that they are going to listen to.
Thank you. Can we applaud everybody on the platform? I mean, personally, what I really liked about today is it's so easy for us to say things about people but not to their face. What's been good about today is very influential people. We can say things exactly to people's faces, and I'd like to thank everybody here for putting themselves up to. I've had a pop taken, and that's great. Personally, having met Mr. Basie 4 times, I don't like to say anything behind people's backs. I'd much rather say it to their face. So I'm going to try and make a few remarks just to kind of sum up some of the points, but also say what I think. The country region is being driven into crisis in the United Kingdom. It's being driven into crisis not specifically for financial reasons, but for ideological ones. The 4 lands that produce the likes of Shakespeare and Dickens, the Brontes and Hardy, Shelley and Blake and Burns, Heaney and Blake have a problem with reading. It's not a problem with everybody, it's not a problem with people in this room. It's a golden age of children's literature. There's never been opportunities like there are now. 2 events I've been invited to recently. We went to Oxford. A wonderful woman called Anne Watton, a local part-time teacher, decided to have an event
with, you know, where children could play and meet books and meet 3 authors, and there'd be costume characters, and we hoped, you know, that with terrible rain we might get 50, 100, 200 people. We got 1,800. Now that indicates that when you talk about the culture of reading, it's healthy, it's positive, and it can be tapped in on. Ed Vaizey, the culture minister, attended, spent more time, in my opinion, looking at his phone than looking at the events. He was there for about half an hour. I turned to him and said, Ed, if you want to see the big society, it is here. If you funded to a very low level people like Anne to go out and propagandise in every county to create advocacy for reading, you would get the response. It is proven here today. And to show that I don't just pontificate about what other people should do, Sefton, borough around Bootle in Merseyside, has been amazingly badly hit by cuts in libraries. About half our libraries were closed. We said we're not giving up on our kids. We raised £20,000 with a charity called Y Kids. £1,500 of that did come from the council, I'll credit them. And we visited half of the schools in the borough, taking 10 authors into the schools. We had 2 days at which on each day 200 people packed into a hall. They did 3 writing activities and had performance from rap poets, Rastafari poet called Levi's Parry, from me doing my infamous gorilla story. The kids were energised. Not one child out of those 400 had to be told off all day. They all went away having written for a whole day. How often in the tracking and testing curriculum would you see that enthusiasm? In other words, there's a culture out there that can be tapped. But in spite of that, a substantial minority of non-readers drags the UK down in things like the UNESCO statistics. It's not the whole population. The recent slippage of the UK, and particularly the US, is because of a very large non-reading section of the population skewing the whole findings. We still have world-class literacy within these islands. Whatever our reservations about the methodology of these things, there's clearly a problem. While most kids, and kids grow into adults, read, there's a significant minority who don't access education and the love of reading. And they disproportionately cost our society dear in prison attendance, in damage, in vandalism, in lack of competitivity. So it seems sensible that we should engage that. Few findings, you'll know this in this room. 1 in 6 children don't read a book in a month. 4 million children don't have a book at home. I mean, I was actually one of them when I was a kid, right? Didn't have a book at home, but I went to the public library in Crewe. I went to the school library at my grammar school. I accessed literacy through a lot of helpful people. They're nice people. They're called librarians. 4 million, right? 4 million without a book at home. We put a book into that child's hand and it's a passport to the future. The obvious solution to this is a healthy library service. Public libraries, school libraries, and a supportive system of school library services. If just one of those was under attack, it would be a disaster. If 3 are under attack, it's an Armageddon sick of excuses from this government. Libraries are effective. There's a mountain of evidence. National Literacy Trust studied 17,000 pupils. Wasn't one of Michael Gove's surveys where you pop to the nearest Premier Inn. They found out that a child who reads and visits a library is twice as likely to be in the top sets at school and to read well. Does that surprise you? The only thing I can say is, well, duh. Nearly half of the 18 to 16-year-old children surveyed used their public library in some way, shape or form. The young and the elderly are disproportionately the biggest users. They're also disproportionately the people who suffer most if there isn't a local branch library. And that is why the branch libraries are so important. The most common reasons children cited for not going to the library were that their family doesn't go, 52%, that their friends don't go, 40%. A public library service campaign to advertise what is effective and what is exciting and possible, that would transform things to get that half of the population part of our reading culture. And yet there is no public advocacy for this government for that fact. Take one simple thing. I wrote asking for school libraries to make statutory. Michael Gove said we can't tell head teachers what to do. He can tell them the height of the fence. He can tell them about safeguarding. He can tell them the curriculum, and yet on the single most important life-enhancing thing, the power to read. When I go to Africa, China, what do they demand? Pens, books, the power to read. And yet, he can abdicate his responsibility, and so does Ed Vaizey. If we had more libraries in the UK would do better. In education, in society, everywhere. Libraries could be interventionists. People have said a lot today. The library now has got to go out, not just to wait for people to come to it. And yet that is not being fired by an overall strategic plan. There is a strategic plan in New Zealand. There isn't even a plug in the United Kingdom. That's the reality. So, if you're with me so far, it gets even better. Public libraries are enshrined in law. The Museums and Public Libraries Act 1964 puts a duty on the Secretary of State to provide a comprehensive and efficient and improving service. You remember that one in the law? Improving. Not degenerating or decomposing. I'm quite good with words. Improving. The service is cheap, less than £1 billion. Where there are bureaucratic failings, they could be addressed. And here I think we can talk about private provision. If there was an intense moral and financial case to replace the public library service because of the efficacy of private industry, well, we might say, yeah, we'll lap it up. Actually, there isn't. All of the evidence is the public library service, where it's funded properly and supported, does very, very well indeed. I was recently in Montreal. It was one of the most saddening things of my life. I was surrounded by a bunch of Canadian librarians. You know what they said? When I was at library school, Britain was actually the global shining light of libraries. Why the hell can't we say that any longer? Now I felt gutted having to listen to that. We have to get that image back. Not for nationalistic reasons. I'm an internationalist. Irish background, English. I don't consider me anything except a human being. But because if we were once a centre of excellence, well, let's sodding well get back there. The libraries of the future are taking place at this very moment. You can see them, what's possible in the great city centre of libraries. Birmingham is the 7th wonder of the world. Liverpool is magnificent. Newcastle, Manchester is being risen from the ashes. But if all we have is a glittering fairy palace in the centre of town with a withered and destroyed branch library network, then nobody will be there. There will be no transition there. This is very bad for the young and old who most heavily access the service but have least access to transport. Those people are betrayed if we allow the branch network to die. We do need that comprehensive and efficient service enshrined in the law. It wouldn't take much to have a thriving public library service, the envy of the world. We could have a three-pronged service that I mentioned before. Excellent public libraries for the geographical communities, superb school libraries, and I'll tell you where the best practice I ever see is those brilliant school librarians, there's one sat in the front row, who know every kid and their interests intimately. Barbara isn't the only one, there are thousands of these wonderful people, the Nikki Heaths and everything, the Laura Taylors. We should be praising these people. Half the time they're desperate for their jobs, they don't know if it's going to be there in the next financial year. Book stocks are gutted. In school after school, you see the school library where there's this connection with these kids is not being supported. And we need comprehensive school library services to support them in their efforts. When I go into school, after they've devolved it and they no longer have this central service, very often the book stock dies. The book stock does not continue year in, year out. The entire public library service, let's say again, costs less than £1 billion. Small beer in the budget of the 6th richest country in the world. The point that was made this morning. Of course, Terry Deary thinks we should spend £3 billion giving 7 million poor people who don't have access to the internet a Kindle each. And this, in the arsey-versey world of Terry, I'm an anarchist, but I support Tory cuts and New Labour cuts in Sunderland, anarchist. This man dares to say it'll save money. He makes up things, and do you know when he makes them up? The next time he's got a book out, let's cause a kerfuffle. Terry, shut up. You are doing us damage. 99.9% of authors support the public library service, the school library. Why? Because this is where our bread's buttered. This is where the readers of tomorrow will come from. And I tell you what gets me, is when somebody who's supposed to be one of us puts the knife through the back. The first name when I debated with the leader of Lincolnshire Council that was thrown at me was Terry Bloody Deering. That's the damage, Terry. That's what's wrong. I've invited him to debate on any platform in Britain, and he's so brave he says no. So that's the good news. An excellent library service is within our reach. Most of the elements are already in place. Do you know what's the problem? Leadership. It all comes down to leadership. In this world you need vision. Martin Luther King had a dream. Ed Vaizey doesn't. He has the strategic vision of Mr. Magoo. A blessed, obliged disregard for public service of a slum landlord. He richly deserved the no confidence vote passed by the professional librarian's body silly. It is not true there's no money. No money? Money's been there for every free school and academy. When they run out of money, they get more money. There's an endless pot. When Eric Pickles wants a weekly bin collection, there's money. And I'll tell you what there's money for. Steve said it this morning, Trident. You can have £80 billion praying that we will not slaughter every human being on the planet, and you can't afford £1 billion to create a civilised, literate society that might just think peace is better than war. What sort of inverse, ridiculous kind of, priorities has that society got? And libraries are being hit disproportionately in the public sector. I still don't understand why a cut of 28% can lead to a 55% cut in some local authorities. I can't understand. I mean, what could it be? The MPs, the Prime Minister in Oxfordshire, and Oxfordshire was badly hit, I'm not going to go at Oxfordshire, and next door to him is another Oxfordshire MP, and isn't it strange that above the wash it is the North that's been hitting worse, and I wonder, could it just be that we vote in shed loads for a party that is not the Conservative Party? We don't have a single councillor in Liverpool who is a Tory. In Manchester there's not a single Tory. In Newcastle there's not a single Tory. Which three cities were probably hit worse than anywhere else? Oh, isn't it a surprise? If people think cuts are necessary, why was the recovery delayed by 2 years? Why is the deficit in 3 years of the coalition higher than in 12 years of Labour? Do you know these statistics? You wouldn't know it from the newspapers. And then Cameron dares to stand on a gilded pulpit, eating quails wrapped in bowls, quaffing it down with champagne, and says, we need austerity forever. Unbelievable. Even if you believe cuts are necessary, and I do not. I don't believe they're necessary. I think the case is not made. Britain actually carried out a different strategy to the States. The States has recovered at exactly the time. Do you know what it's called? It's called the natural cycle of the capitalist economy. George didn't do it. Everybody's recovering. It is not down to him. If you read a book, George, you'd know that. So, instead of fighting tooth and claw, in difficult circumstances, to preserve our libraries, the DCMS website, I don't know if you had anything to do with this, openly promotes volunteer libraries. Unbelievable. I don't think it is the job of the DCMS to promote volunteer libraries that might just, by their extension, lead to the death of the public library service. We are not having a go at volunteers. You know we're not. You've spoken to me often enough. The point is that they don't take the place of professional librarians. They supplement the service. Before this crisis, there were 7,000 volunteers. They did a great job. We'd like to have 30,000, but we're not going to give up the librarians. 12% of librarians have been sacked. That is the scandal. That is the scandal. There might just not be anything to supplement. And all of this has happened under Ed Vaizey's watch. And if we look abroad, Finland's penetration of rural and mobile libraries is the best in the world. New Zealand has a coherent library plan. In South Korea, joint top of the international literacy rankings, they've built 180 new libraries. Is it an accident? And in the country of Shakespeare, we're shutting 350. It's an absolute moral scandal. The number of libraries in Japan is now the highest ever, up 3.4%. They had a longer and deeper recession than the United Kingdom. Do you know how many more librarians? 11.3%. We've got 12% fewer. All these countries have had to survive challenging economic circumstances. Libraries could have a great future, but I don't believe we will have it while there is no leadership. It is not coming from the Culture Minister Ed Vaizey. He has no strategic vision. He refuses to intervene, no matter how destructive the closure programmes of councils are. He refuses to fulfil his duty to superintend the service. He permits the hollowing out of the service through job cuts, closures, reduced opening hours and falling book stocks. He uses the DCMS website to propagandise for volunteer libraries, and his legal remit is a comprehensive, efficient and improving service. He said one thing in opposition, and he's doing something entirely different in office, and that is not permissible. He said, a library without books, lots of books, is not a library. And now he says, and he said this to me and Julia Donaldson, and he said it to somebody who's in this audience, that a telephone box with some books is a library. A shelf in a pub is a library. This is not permissible from the Secretary of State in the 6th richest country in the world. When Andy Burnham refused to take part in Wirral, he said that it was a scandal. He attacked him for not following through his legal requirements, and now he carries through cuts infinitely worse and says, I can't see any cuts. He is Nelson putting the telescope to his blind eye. I'd accuse him of being useless, but he's already admitted that to himself, to his spat, and got caught saying it to the Metro newspaper. Most of all, I accuse him of lack of empathy, of enjoying the benefits of literature and learning while allowing those very benefits to people who don't have his benefits of wealth to be denied. There are two wings of our campaign. Protest wing, I'm part of that. I don't believe in cuts. I took part in more demonstrations than Soft Mick. And the persuasion wing. Do you know what's great? We've held together those two wings of this movement year after year after year, talked cordially, begged to disagree over the small things, but in our passion for the library service, we remain united. There must be no squabbling, no turning around and blaming people when things get tough. We have to maintain that unity. We have to keep up that argument for a decent public library service through thick and thin. We do not have the libraries we need yet. Some of them are inadequate, usually because they've been starved of funds. But I'll tell you what, we will not get the libraries of tomorrow that Phil talks about so eloquently if we let the libraries of today die. And that is why we fight on, colleagues. Thanks very much. Do you have anything to say, Laura?
Not really. We do want to take this forward. We do want to get some actual practical action and some provision of, okay, we want to get some action, we want to get some sorting out. I don't quite know how to set about it, but I want to get all the people behind that table and all the other people who should be here talking together at our invitation. I don't know how, but we're going to do it because there's so much wastage, there's so much that's needed. We've identified more stuff today that is needed, it could all be better provided. That's all I'm really going to say now. We'll carry this forward. Meanwhile, tea downstairs, and at 4:30 the Marlborough Arms, Torrington Place, just round the corner, and I'll read you the postcode if you're out. WC1E 7LY. That's downstairs first.
Right. I think